Hello, everyone. Welcome to Cindy's Friday Forum. My name is Cindy McDonald. I'm a counselor, I'm an educator, and an entrepreneur, and also I happen to be a mom and a grandmom, all those roles that we all often wear. And as you're coming in today and joining me for this very first Friday Forum this year, I want you to put in your name and your location. And that way you can let our guest, Miss Lyndy Barnard, know where you're from and your name and where you're from. Also, we're wondering about, we're going to talk about teen mental health. We all work with teenagers, with adolescents. We've seen that really shift over the last few years, especially after COVID. So we have a question for you as you're logging in to talk, just answer the question, have you seen an increase and mental health issues in teens? So glad to have everybody here today and glad to have you joining us. And this is going to be a really great conversation. And we're going to talk about virtual reality. So as you're logging in and you're sharing this, I want to introduce you to Lyndy. She is an LCSW, and I'm going to have you talk about what that is. She is also the founder of her own counseling practice in Bountiful, Utah, Mind and Strength Counseling. And she has a focus and has a lot of experience working with adolescents, helping them with um, anxiety, depression, body image, eating disorders, many of the things that we run into as college counselors. So glad to have you, Lyndy. How are you doing today?
I'm good. Excited to be here. Also, Mind and Strength Counseling has just opened a location in Las Vegas, Nevada. So we can actually serve clients in both Utah, and Nevada throughout the state. So yeah, that's exciting. I'm good. I was just joking that I will try to make sure I call her Cindy because this is actually my mom. So she didn't mention that. I think she did in the things, but when I first told her we were bringing virtual reality to the practice, we were trying to integrate that into what we were doing, especially with teenagers. She asked me to hop on one of these Friday forums because she was interested in that. Bringing technology into what we do in mental health is just a really fascinating thing and such a great tool. And teenagers are all about technology. So I'm excited to talk about it today and I'm excited to see where people are from. So obviously I grew up in the Central Valley. Um, and I went to graduate school at Cal State Hayward. So I was in the Bay Area, loved the Bay Area. Got too expensive to live there. We lived in Nashville, Tennessee for a little bit, and now we're in Utah, and we've been in Utah now since 2012, so we're going on 12, 13 years. So yeah, so I like Cindy mentioned, I'm a licensed clinical social worker. That is LCSW for short. So what that means is I have my master's in social work. And then after graduate school, to be a mental health to be in mental health, you have to do hours after you graduate. And that's why they differentiate L, like a licensed clinical social worker, versus someone that just says MSW, like master social worker, is that you do additional up to 4,000 hours after your graduate school in clinical settings that really focus on mental health. So that's what an LCSW is. There's a lot of different paths. You guys are school counselors. One of my associates is actually has her degree in school counseling and then went back and took extra classes in mental health and transitioned to mental health counseling. So um that's a little bit about me. I've been, like I said, I've lived in different places. My first job out of school was working mobile crisis in Oakland. And people joke with me that I should write a book one day because I've got some crazy stories from working mobile crisis in Oakland, California. So I'm grateful over all the years of my experience. I've had the chance to did an internship in a school with foster youth. So I've worked school, residential, mobile crisis, hospital, and then over the last About 8 years. I have twins who are about 8. So after they were born is when I kind of transitioned more to outpatient mental health individual counseling.
Great. Well, you have had quite a broad range of experience. And I remember when you moved to Utah, everybody said, well, if you could handle things in Oakland, you can handle anything.
That's
So,
how I landed my first job. He saw my resume and said, "Oh, if you did mobile crisis in Oakland, you could do this."
so Lyndy, explain a little bit about, you talked a little bit about the L in your LCSW. How does that differ from a psychologist?
So psychologists, there's actually two routes for psychologists. My clinical supervisor for mind and straight counseling is actually a psychologist. So there's the PhD level, and then you'll also see people with the letters PsyD, and that's a PsyD. So that's more of a clinical focus and less a diagnostic focus. So if you're gonna you probably deal with this a lot as school counselors. I know I reached out to Cindy because we were looking at some testing for our own son um, for academic issues, right? And as school counselors helping teens, you guys run into this. So a psychologist that does testing is probably going to be a PhD level psychologist. And that means they do, so it's like master level and getting a doctorate degree. A PsyD is a 2 to 3 year program, but it's a little shorter than the full blown PhD. Psychologists and a licensed clinical social worker like myself can both do therapy, but a psychologist has 3+ more years of schooling expertise. They have more diagnostic, they have more experience in that testing realm than a therapist does. So like I can diagnose someone with depression, anxiety, but there's certain diagnoses such as like if I want to look at academics, haven't been trained for that, but a psychologist has because of those additional years of school.
Well, that makes sense. And I think that's a really good distinction to have because our students often wonder and they'll tell us, oh, I want to be a psychologist. And they don't know that they can, but they want to do therapy. So they don't know that they
Yeah,
can do that LCSW as a route to that.
which is much less years in school, right? Like, honestly, psychologists will make more. But if you're taking insurance, the difference isn't huge. So a lot of psychologists, like doing the testing, and that's why they decided to go the psychologist route versus just a master level going into therapy. But those are things students should think about is what are your end goals? Because there are actually several different routes to get into being a mental health like provider or therapist.
Mhm. Good, good, good. And I just want to recognize we even have someone here from Kenya, Nairobi. So we're glad to have you here, Evans. And the word about this has spread clear across the globe. I know Shanice was sharing information about it as well. So, Lyndy, what inspired you to go and focus on teens and adolescents as part of your practice?
Um, well, you can't. So mind and strength really focuses our main specialties are body image, eating disorders, OCD, and anxiety. You cannot treat those things without working with teenagers. And I've worked with teenagers throughout my career, and teens, so we see predominantly 10 plus. When you start working with younger kids, you got to be really specialized and really know how to work with younger kids. So they'll oftentimes will use play therapy for younger kids. And we don't really do that at Mind and Strength. But what really inspired me is one, I've worked with teens throughout my life. And we're all seeing the impact that mental health is having on teens. Like the question, like in your work, are you guys seeing that increase in mental health, anxiety, stress, school avoidance, perfectionism? And the pressures are just, intense. I don't remember feeling so much pressure so young when I was growing up. Um, well, my mom joked when we were in high school. She says she doesn't remember this, but I'll give you guys a little personal tidbit here. Because she's a school counselor and really huge advocate of going to college. She joked with me and my sisters that we all needed to go to school 100 miles outside of where we grew up. She swears she didn't say that, but all three of us remember this. So we all went out of state for school because she really wanted us to have that college experience, which was I loved loved college. I had an amazing college experience. And that's also the first time I really like found a really good group of friends. I had good friends in high school, but my college friends are different and great friends to this day. So, especially with the work with body image and eating disorders, it starts as young as 6 years old. And so I'm really passionate about trying to, and the average recovery for someone that struggles with the eating disorder is 7 to 10 years. So we're really passionate about working with teens and their mental health issues because if they can get the proper help earlier in that journey, how long they struggle with it vastly decreases. And like someone might be prone to anxiety and they might outgrow it, but they may not, like Mind and Strengths of vision and mission is really focused on building resiliency is how do we help people adapt in the face of adversity. And the conversation like I was just having with one of our interns yesterday and that I have with the team is like we're not going to be able to cure people of these challenges because we're all going to face issues in our life, but we want to build their confidence that when stuff comes up, they're going to be able to know how to handle it. And if teens have a better team of support that's focused on love, connection, and their strengths earlier
Mhm.
on, then hopefully they don't deal with what some of us as adults have had to deal with, or they feel better equipped to deal with it. So, there's been so much work around decreasing the stigma around mental health that really has helped open up the door to those conversations.
That's exciting. And it's interesting to learn that it does take years. It's not something that just comes up and goes away in, a few months or 6 months or something.
Yeah, and there's situations like there's obviously situational anxiety, situational grief, situational depression, but in general, we're all going to run into those situations in our life. So that's where really try to have the conversation with people like, let's help you learn what this is, how it shows up for you, so that next time it shows up, you feel better equipped to deal with it.
Mhm, mhm. So, how did you learn about virtual reality and how that relates to what your experience is with students and teens?
So like I said, Mind and Strength, one of our focuses is on body image and eating disorders, and those two things tend to go hand in hand. And I was working with several eating disorder cases where one of the hardest things, and you'll hear this a lot with teens, there's so much concern, and right, like one of their developmentally, like if anybody's familiar with Erickson's model of development, like in those teenage years, it's all about trying to fit in and the friend group and individualization, like individualizing yourself from your family of origin.
Yeah.
And so a lot of teens feel a lot of pressure to fit in. And that means, what am I wearing? What do I look like? What am I doing? Right. Like, but you shared an article with me about the obsession with boys and their hair right now. And I'm like, yep, I'm seeing that in my own house. So, I was working with a lot of body image cases and eating disorder cases. And one of the biggest barriers, especially with my teenage clients, was that fear of gaining weight, the fear of their body changing and friends noticing it, and then friends rejecting them. And what I was finding is in a therapeutic environment, I could talk till I'm blue and be like, but that's not the most important. Just do it and you'll see that that's not true, right? Like I could talk until I'm blue in the face and they're not going to believe it. And it's really hard to convince people that their friends are still going to like them if they gain weight, if that's the thing they think is the reason why they have a friend group. And it's really hard in a therapy setting or even at home with your parents to convince yourself otherwise. And then I went to a training for OCD. The gold standard of treating obsessive compulsive disorder is exposure response prevention. And exposure response prevention is all about making people in a therapeutic setting get exposed to seeing the situations they're terrified of and not acting on compulsive compulsions. Like in OCD, one of the common ones is like hand washing, right? That's what people always think of. So you're trying to teach them how to not wash their hands when they're anxious and how to deal with that emotion instead. And as I was going through this training, they were in it, they call them exposure. So like you would sit in session with a client and you would have them touch a dirty doorknob and not let them leave the room and wash their hands. And I was like, well, but I can't do that with people that are scared to gain weight. And then I started wondering, like, but what about a virtual reality setting? So then I started researching it online. I found a psychologist. I found a couple, one out of the East Coast, and then Dr. Elizabeth McMahon, who had actually started a national association for virtual reality exposure therapy for treating anxiety and phobias. She wrote a book. I read her book. I Googled her and I found her contact information and I reached out to her and I was like, oh my gosh, I read this book. This is fascinating. I want to learn more about this. And she was willing to do training. So she did 2 trainings with my team, spent, 4+ hours with my team training them, and then she ended up having to retire. But I'm so grateful we got direct training. She's been doing it for 14 years. And we found a platform that is built for treating health issues and anxieties in virtual reality. So we partnered with them. And now we have a system where we can manually control environments from the computer as the therapist, and the client puts on the VR headset, and then we can walk through the scenarios with them that have caused anxiety. So, like for my eating disorder clients, we can put their in front of a mirror and we can actually even upload a picture of them where they have to look a picture of themselves in virtual reality. Or we can put a silhouette of a body like an avatar. And the research has actually supported that seeing an avatar is actually just as effective as seeing themselves. And it actually decreases their anxiety a little bit because it's just a far enough removed from actual reality that their anxiety doesn't spike to a place where they can't cope with it. So it actually helps speed up the process of working through some of their fears and anxieties, because they're seeing it in real time with the therapist in controlled environment. But like in some situations, it's not 100% real, so it brings their anxiety down just enough. And in the treatment we call it subjective units of distress. So we usually ask them on a scale of 1 to 10, like how much anxiety or distress does this cause? So it causes enough that it feels really real, but you're not like out in public in Walmart and they're, breaking down. So for my eating disorder and body image clients, it's awesome because I can make them sit and look at their body in this avatar, and I can change the size of their hips, the size of their butt, their size of their stomach. And if we got in deeper, I could really tell you that like most body image issues are so much deeper than actual just physical manifestations. But this is a really good way for them to deal with the anxiety around the physical manifestations. And then that helps us get deeper to some of the underlying things.
Yeah. And I think most of us are aware that body image, and eating disorders do stem from much deeper issues for teens. It just becomes manifest in an eating disorder or a body image,
Mm-hmm.
issue or things like that.
Yeah. And oftentimes it'll start with just this desire to lose weight or desire to fit in or a desire to look like so and so. But what tends to perpetuate it are these deeper issues.
Hmm. Hmm. So how long have you been using this with your patients, Lyndy?
We started training the team. It was actually around this time last year. We did training in January, February, and March, and then we started implementing it with the team in May. So we've been using it most of last year. I'll be honest, like some of it is still trying to get clients buy-in. But hey, I
Mhm.
just had a client that actually saw us last year call me back as like, I need to get back in and I'm really interested in doing your virtual reality. And she actually lives about an hour and a half away. So we've been meeting with her virtually. And she's so like, I think I really need to do this now. We talked about it last year, but I think I really need to do this, that they're probably going to be driving down at some point to come do this.
Wow, wow. And you mentioned that it often shortens the amount of time that it takes for doing the
Yeah.
therapy. Why is
Yeah,
that?
There's been partly because what we find, especially with anxiety-based disorders, we anxiety in some way, sometimes I describe it to the clients as it's the disease of uncertainty. It's the fear of the unknown, right? Like, and we
Mhm.
try to find ways to control our environment or what we're doing, and so you can't talk you can't just talk your way out of it. And anxiety is also a physiological response, right? This is why people have probably heard a lot online about somatic based approaches, where it's like, where do you feel it in your body? A lot of people talk now about the nervous system. And that's because when you have an anxiety attack or an anxiety response, it activates your parasympathetic nervous system. You start feeling the adrenaline, you start feeling the cortisol, you start feeling the increased heart rate, and then you have the racing thoughts where things are spinning in your head. So, but like, for example, and this is, I'll show you the video. I have a video that I can show you guys of what one of the virtual reality environments in the platform we use looks like. And this is something that comes up for teens because they're learning how to drive. So let's say a teen already struggles with anxiety and now they're turning 15, 16, have to start driving, and there's a lot of anxiety about that, and it's really scary and overwhelming to get behind the wheel of a car, right? Maybe they have a panic attack, they start hyperventilating. Just telling them stop thinking about it doesn't work. So the reason it decreases the amount of time is because we can put them in that environment, like driving a car, in the office where they're not at risk, where they start feeling that increased heart rate, and we can help talk them through. And we call it the fears versus facts. So like, we do about 1 to 3 prep sessions before we put them in virtual reality. So we're identifying what their anxiety symptoms are, their you know fears are. So the other common fears that we have environments for: medical. So there's a hospital setting that you could put them in, like in a hospital waiting room, in a doctor's office. You can actually literally, like, if they're going to get surgery, right? Especially for a teen who's never done that. Like, honestly, over my career, and I'm sure you guys have seen it too, it's actually surprising how many teens struggle with some pretty complex medical stuff. So we can put them in those environments. So we do this fear and fact sheet where we talk about what are your fears, what may or may not be true, what are some like coping skills to deal with it. So that might be breathing, that might be fiddling with my hands, that might be, it may or may not be true that I get hurt. It may or may not be true that I crashed the car, but because we don't want to tell them nothing's going to happen, because
Right.
the reality is something could happen. And that's what exposure is teaching them that yes, this stuff could happen, but you can deal with it. And so doing it in environment in the office decreases it because it's really hard to replicate outside. One study that was done for adolescents with school anxiety, age range 14 to 17. They did 5, we call them VRET, so virtual reality exposure treatment sessions. They did 5, self-reported their anxiety, and then they saw a decrease. They give these a significant reduction in state of anxiety, and then it gives a 0.04 as the mean, and the social anxiety symptoms were a 0.82. So basically, after 5 sessions that can run anywhere from 10 minutes to 45, 50 minutes,
Wow.
they saw a significant reduction in their school anxiety and their social anxiety. We typically have seen a 50% reduction in as little as 1 to 2 VRT sessions.
Wow. And how do parents feel about this?
Some parents, so lately we've had, especially the boy parents, have been a lot more on board with it.
Interesting.
I think because they're the ones, like, we have some ADHD, kids that are really into video games and those type of things.
Hmm.
Um, I think, the parents have been a little on board, um, a little bit more on board when it comes to the boys than they have been the girls. And I think some of that might be too because one of our girl clients are coming in for eating disorders, and
Mhm.
the body image stuff is actually some of the hardest things to hit on. So we also try to be very mindful of where in that process we integrate VR. Because if you do it too early, that'll shut them down. So like that's part of what
Mhm.
we have to therapeutically assess for is that readiness. So we have like some scales, and obviously just us talking and asking questions like we do a clinical intake assessment. So we have some clients, teenage girls right now that we want to use this with. We're getting ready to launch some groups where we're going to be using the VR. But it's usually maybe like with our eating disorder clients, it's usually maybe 6 months into treatment before we bring this in, because we don't want to do it too early in the process where they go, nope, can't gain weight and shut down.
Right, right, right. Well, so show us your video. So it sounds fascinating, Lindy. And I can see
Okay,
Kate
so
said that too.
okay, so the one I'm going to show you is from C2 Care is the one we use. They're a French-based company, and um I couldn't, it's too hard to share the actual VR from my computer onto the screen. So this is from their YouTube website. I wish I could show you one of their body image ones, but they don't have one on their YouTube. But this is driving. So I'll kind of show you, like, they give some prompts here, but I kind of will show you like what we would do. One, we would prep the client. And the other cool thing with this VR is they also have mindfulness ones. So we usually were first put them in a calming environment. Like, hey, do you like to walk on the ocean? Do you like to like go in a forest? So just to kind of get them comfortable, because it's literally like if you have a claustrophobic client, you got to kind of be aware because it's literally putting a MetaQuest headset on your head, and then you have the controller. So everywhere they turn, right, they can see. And that's what really makes it really fully immersive versus just looking at a YouTube video. So before we get into this environment, we've already gone through like, okay, what are some of your fears about this? So like I already know some of the things that they say to themselves in their head. So this is like, okay, you're on your first drive. This is the first time you've gotten in the car. Okay, now you're having to drive at night. What are some of the thoughts going through your head right now? So then I'd have them verbalize what are some of the thoughts. And the more you repeat things, and this is part of exposure, when people are practicing exposure for OCD, the recommendation is you want to expose them to those things that they're scared of up to 30 times a day. So when people are in intensive treatment for obsessive compulsive disorder, they're having to think and say and expose themselves to these things multiple times. So like if I'm sitting here and the client's going through like a teenager driving for the first time, teenager's thinking, I'm going to crash. Okay, so you're driving along and you can't stop thinking, I'm going to crash. I'm going to crash. I'm going to crash. Do you see anybody there? Okay, no, okay, now there's car. What's the thought now? Be slow, be slow, be slow. Okay, where do you feel that in your body right now? And so at first, I'm not trying to get them to change the experience. I'm just getting them to verbalize the experience of what's happening in that moment. And then I'm going to fast forward this for a second. So then let's say we do that. We do that for like 10, 15 minutes. Okay. And then we get off the headset and then we talk through it. And we talk through, okay, so where are you on that scale of 1 to 10? Oh, I'm like a 6. Okay, so now let's take some deep breaths. Okay, what was the worst fear? That I was going to crash. Okay, it may or may not be true. You can crash on the road. Did you or did you not crash? No, I did not crash. Okay, what is it like to know that this time you did not crash? Okay, I got through the first time. Okay, now where are you on that scale of 1 to 10? I'm at a 3. Now, obviously, this doesn't happen this quickly, but then we put them back in the same environment and we would start it over. And that might be during the same session or that might be subsequent sessions. Do you want to watch a little bit more?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to fast forward it for a
Okay.
second. Okay, so now, do you see now we are
A
stimulating
traffic
something
jam.
different? Okay, so let's say they're coming back in and we're like, hey, you got through driving alone with nobody there. And now and now you went and practice it with your parents. What was your distress on a scale of 1 to 10? Oh, it was like a 3. I was nervous at first. I was like, I'm going to crash. But then I was like, I may or may not crash. There's no one on the road. I could hold the wheel, take some deep breaths, and just focus on the moment and try to get my head to stop. Okay, so do you want to go back in the VR environment and try something that might be a little bit more intense and scary that you haven't faced on the road yet? And we will have already written this on the list, because this isn't going to be the first scenario we give them. We're going to give them an easier one and build up to the more distressing ones. So, I mean, okay, on a scale of 1 to 10, how much anxiety do you feel? Okay, do you mind role playing with me for just a
Yeah,
second?
I can totally do that. Yep.
Okay, all right. So pretend this is like super anxiety provoking for you, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Which it probably isn't, because you drive all the time and she has no problem driving anywhere.
Well, it was when I was in England.
That's true.
Or in fact, I was just thinking, Lindy, this would have helped me a lot because
When you
that
had to
was
drive on
full
the
of
other side of the
anxiety.
road.
I would drive and then not drive for 2 days. So, yes, I
And if
could.
you guys have questions, I know Carmen is monitoring the chat. Like, please feel free to ask any questions. Tell me to slow down. Like, whatever you guys need, she'll let me know. Like, and I'll stop and answer your questions.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, what is it like to see so many cars?
I'm scared to death, especially that big truck. He's bigger than I am. And
Okay, where do you feel that in your body?
I feel it in my chest
Okay,
and in my arm.
now, okay. And so now that there aren't as many cars, how much does anxiety go down?
It goes down quite a bit. I probably have gone down from an 8 to about a 6.
Okay, so let's come back here. I'm going to pause it for a second because this is just a demo, so it goes a lot faster. The nice thing
Uh-huh.
is, when I have control of it, I can keep you in that situation.
Mm-hmm.
I can add cars. I can take cars away. Or like we love doing this with our teens for social anxiety. There's a school scenario. So you could put them in a test. You could put them in a group. We can control the faces of the group. So we can start the group as happy, and then let's say the teen is practicing, maybe giving like one of my therapists did it with a client who sings. So they practice doing their performance that would give them a lot of anxiety in the VR. And then you can change the reaction of the audience. So they can be happy, they can be neutral, they can be distracted, they can be angry. So we can change the environment to elicit the anxiety that we want them to feel. And then our job during that session is to help them learn how to tolerate that and deal with it.
Mm-hmm. Well, that is fascinating that you have that much control and you have to imagine those scenarios and put them in place so that you are eliciting that kind of anxiety that you're helping the student face.
Mm-hmm.
So, um,
Yeah. And so, like, for example, with our body image ones, I can put them in front of a mirror. I can
mhm.
manipulate the avatar to change their body. And then and then we kind of talk. And once they can look at themselves with a decreased anxiety at like a 3 or 4, whether it be in that first session or the one of my clients, we were able to do it by session 3. Then I put them in a social environment. Okay, now imagine your body in this new body that we created. Then I put you in a social situation where people show negative reactions to you, because so much of what actually motivated me to really look in the VR is like, it's not the body itself that really triggers, especially teens. It's that fear of rejection and the fear of how other people are going to react. And that was my main motivation of integrating this into my practice, was trying to figure out, how do I help them face that fear.
Wow. Well, that's just amazing. It's just amazing. Do they have any? So for us as counselors, the big issue oftentimes is transition. And that's something I really, really focus on a lot in my practice and in the teaching that I do. Because they're facing an unknown and
Mhm.
totally new social situations, and we always find students who are gung-ho 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 until it comes right down to the day where they have to leave, and then they don't go. And so, and it often comes back to some of these fear and anxiety and all these
Oh yeah.
things that they haven't even really expressed. And yet the social norm is, oh, you're going to go have the best part of the day, the best time of your life. You're at the epitome of whatever it is you want to do. And I mean, I had one young lady who literally went to the campus for the orientation and went home with her parents. And mom and dad called me. It was like, what do we do? So how could this be applied to some of those kinds of situations that we as college counselors run into?
Yeah, it's interesting because like personally, oh man, I went to college. I didn't look back. Like, I left for college 2 weeks after I graduated from high school. I
Yes,
was
you did.
done. I was like, and had the time of my life. So it's been interesting over my career to see. And also, like, I remember people personally who didn't have a good transition and ended up back home. And like, personally, it was so hard for me to relate to. But I think I was the third. I mean, you really prepared us for that next stage of life, I think, in a way that other parents don't. And I think that's because of your experience as a college counselor. So, like, as college counselors, one, I think you guys have seen how hard that transition can be. That if you can prep both parents and the kids for it, it helps with that transition. So that's one, like that education. And you guys do that a lot, right? Like you help them, like for so many of them, it's the first time going through it, whether it be the actual student or whether it be the parents and their oldest child, right? Like when you're going through it for the first time, you really don't know what to expect. And so, as a college counselor, when you're dealing with so many transitions and unknowns, again, anxiety being that disease of uncertainty, it naturally, there is a natural, there's a reason anxiety is the body's alarm system, right? There are some natural, understandable responses. It's when anxiety perpetuates into this unknown context and state, and you can't place it into something real, that it becomes very problematic. So if you guys can educate, and it's some of it is hard because like you'd be like, oh, people told me, but I didn't know how hard it would be. So that's where virtual reality can kind of help like create some of those real life scenarios. But I'd say one, as college counselors, and I'm guessing a lot of you already do this, education, education, education. Normalize. A lot of kids really struggle with this transition. It's really scary to move in with someone you've never, lived with. Like, here are some of the
Yeah.
most common challenges with it. Like, sometimes we like you said, focus on all the wonderfulness about it. We don't talk about the negatives and the challenges. And then when the negatives and the challenges outweigh the positives, people end up feeling like they're a personal failure. What's wrong with them? Why couldn't I do it? So I think the more you can, I call it like anticipatory anxiety, when we're really scared of like, oh, what may happen? What if, what if, what if? So the more we can educate of like, here are some of the most common challenges, here are some of the hardest parts of this transition. What are some of the things you're worried about? Don't be afraid to talk about those fears. Don't be afraid to talk about those what ifs. That's what we do before a virtual reality setting. And we do this all the time, whether we're using the virtual reality or not, is we want to start vocalizing those things that spin in our head all the time. And then
Mhm.
if we're vocalizing it, then I can start thinking about what environment in virtual reality might help them face that fear a little bit. Like, for example, there's a lot of social setting ones in it. They have ones where there's alcohol. They built it for someone dealing with an addiction, which I guess that does happen to teens. That's not our main population, so I don't deal with that a lot. But I can use that scenario for, okay, you're going off to college. There's going to be parties and there's going to be alcohol there. And that makes you anxious. And you're afraid that people are going to judge you if you say no, but you don't want to drink. Okay, let's put you in this scenario and talk you through and managing that anxiety, right? Or moving out for the first time, right? They keep adding environments. I'm trying to think off the top of my head if they have one I could use there. They do. They have dirty houses. There's another one. You live with roommates. You're super clean. Now you have a roommate that's super dirty, right? Like reminds me of some crazy stories I had with roommates. We all had those, right? So like, yeah, like the biggest thing is helping them verbalize those fears because some of them are scared that they're not normal for being nervous about this,
Mhm.
right? And so
Mhm.
we have to get them, and that's where, as parents, as college counselors, you really have to lead with love and connection because some of them are what if, what if, what if, what if, how am I going to do this? How am I going to deal with this? How is this? How is this? Right. But they don't know how to verbalize it and they think something's wrong with them for being nervous about those transitions because everybody else tends to glorify it.
Mhm.
In my career and currently I still work a ton with a ton of college students. Like, and we don't, our office is only about 15 minutes away from the University of Utah. So we get a lot of University of Utah clients and they're sending us, they're eating, like they're referring to us for eating disorders from the university. So we get a lot of that. And the more and more I've been working with these college students, I've decided that I labeled the 20s the decade of change because there's just constant transitions and change. And so now one way I try to educate these kids in their 20s and they're, like just getting into college or ready to transition out of college is like, you're in the decade of transition and change. Things are constantly changing for you. And I've gotten feedback that that normalization of like, oh, okay, everyone deals with this and it's hard for a lot of us really, really decreases that anxiety.
Wow. Wow. Well, so where do you see? So I have two questions. Where do you see virtual reality, this kind of therapy, or this kind of approach? What do you see for the future? What's on the horizon for it, Lyndy?
There's more and more research coming out, like more and more, like for example, every year in Las Vegas, which is great because now I have a location in Las Vegas, at the consumer show that they usually do in January. More and more VR companies are popping up there. I follow closely a Swedish. There's more research within the mental health space in VR being done in Europe than there is in the United States right now. So I had been kind of searching and looking and got linked up with this Swedish based VR company. I can't even pronounce it. On LinkedIn, I actually got to meet with one of their researchers. I got to meet with one of their grant writers. Like, guys, I dived 100% into this and I just cold messaged whoever I could find who was doing research on this because especially when it came to how to use this with eating disorders, literally this Swedish-based company was the only one I could find that had been doing some research on it. And they're trying to get some grants with some universities because they have some with in Sweden and Belgium, and they're trying to partner up with some universities here. So if you know of any universities that want to do some VR research in mental health, let me know because I'm like, come to the United States. I want to help. I want to be part of your pilot study. So they're increasing it, right? But like I said, this Swedish company is the biggest one I've seen that's researching it in regards to the eating disorder work I do. There's a company called XR Health here based in the United States that has done a lot and they got bought out by a bigger company. And so they're doing more and more. I didn't go with that platform because they didn't have one body image environment in their system. I was like, well, that's what I'm looking for. So like I said, what I was looking for, I've been able to find more from European providers than I could in the United States. The platform we use is called C2 Care. It's a French-based company. But I just see it growing and growing. Like I mentioned to you before that this Swedish company is doing a VR conference in June or July or something. So I just
Mhm.
see it growing and growing. I know places are doing the research, right? This company is doing research right now in pilot studies in Sweden about using it with eating disorders. They're basing it on previous studies they had done on using VR for schizophrenia, because schizophrenia
Oh,
is like, is how do we help them? Um, externalize the voices. So like in VR, they can literally have the voices be outside their head, and then it helps them try to learn to recognize what's real and what's not. So which is very fascinating. But I just see it growing and growing. And honestly, from the research I've done, at least in the areas of mental health that I'm really interested in, the European uh countries are a little bit ahead of the United States on the research end.
Imagine that. Imagine that. So, and we have quite a few European participants in my audience. So they should send me connections, send me questions, send me ideas that we can pass on to you to fast forward. So, as a counselor, as a college advisor, is this something that I should do on my own?
Not in the virtual reality exposure therapy, no, because that is a treatment modality for mental health, and it's one of the ones, right? Like, we see a lot of crossover in psychology and school counseling, obviously, right? One of my therapists transitioned from school counseling. She had to take extra classes, in order to be able to get a mental health license, right? Like there's a lot of crossover, and a lot of same concepts. And I know you guys have similar skill sets. But
Mhm.
exposure response prevention therapy is one that you actually need to go get more training and certification. I make my therapist go to a 4-day intensive training, and there's ongoing consultation. So can virtual reality, like, even this C2 Care has one where people can do it themselves without the guidance of a therapist, right? There's risks involved with that. So I wouldn't recommend, because you want to kind of stay in your scope. But if
Mhm.
you're seeing your clients have high anxiety around specific situations, around fears, but then again, we've really learned to realize how broad we can apply this, right? Of like, oh, you're scared of people judging you. Okay, let's put you in an environment where people are judging you while you're with me and figure out how you can cope with that, because it's to have a therapist right there in your ear doing it in the moment is a lot more powerful than just me telling you to go do it on your own. Even though I have clients all the time be like, oh, Lyndy, I could hear you in my head saying this, now I literally can do that. So, no, it's not something I would have you do on your own. I would look to see if you feel like this is something that would be beneficial for teens that you're working with that are showing signs of anxiety, depression, eating disorder, body image, specific phobias, right? Like I mentioned, health anxiety is a big one we use this for, driving, heights, planes. I mean, we have people that are scared of flying. So, oh, well, I'm not going to apply to that college, even though they might have like the exact thing I want to study, but I can't get on an airplane type scenario. So, I would look like the virtual reality is not as very mainstream yet. So, like Elizabeth McMahon, she started the Association for, what was it? I can't remember what it's called. I'll try to tell you, Carmen, so you can look it up. Virtual reality association or something like that for therapists. Like they have a list on the website. We're not on the website. Like it's not a very active community. I'm glad I found it, because then I found people that were kind of like pioneers in this area. But the website itself is not very well put together.
It's probably put
But
together a while ago, yeah.
yeah, you can look for therapists in your area who specifically provide it.
And that's the thing. And one of the things that we try to do is build those relationships and those networks within our communities.
Yes,
Uh,
Carmen, that is it.
she found it. Um, and because we can refer people. And if we as counselors, whether we're in a school, a community-based organization, independent, or whatever, a parent, um, if we're start asking, how are you using virtual reality? Have you considered this? And start pushing, kind of exposing to that, then that might prompt them to
Yeah.
start looking at it, even if
hmm
they haven't yet. So,
And the other cool thing, the platform we use specifically, they're working on this in development. in practice yet. Like the XR Health is, but again, I didn't go with that one because it didn't have what I needed for my practice. But some of the platforms, you have the capacity to do it telehealth. So like they have a phone app that if someone has they have these cheap headsets you could buy at Amazon where you put your phone in it. You can actually do it virtual like this, where the therapist is in the same room, but we're still using the virtual, and then the app attaches to the program on my computer, so I can still manipulate the
The scenario.
environment.
Mhm.
So like there are therapists that are multi-licensed in multiple states, and something to be aware of, especially for what you guys do. As college counselors, like I see this happen all the time. I'm sure you guys see it. It's like, okay, they're going to school out of state, they're already working with a therapist, but now they have to find another therapist because I'm moving to another
Mhm.
state.
Yep.
Psychologists are already part of what's called the Psi Pact. So most psychologists, if you ask them, if are you part of the Psi Pact, all but 5 states are allowing Psi Pact, meaning if the psychologist applies and joins the Psi Pact, they can practice in 33 states.
Wow.
I think it's 33, but all but like 5 or 6, right? They're working on that same concept for social workers, licensed clinical social workers, marriage family therapists, and clinical mental health counselors. Clinical mental health counselors. And so each state has to agree to join this compact. But what that's really going to do is increase the capacity of therapists to see clients across state lines and still be considered practicing with a license, even if you don't have an individual license from that state, which is great for college students who are traveling
Mhm.
all
Mhm.
over. So that's something that you guys should be aware of, because that'll increase the capacity for people to stay with their therapist, find a new therapist, or even, like I said, since not as many people are doing virtual reality, there are remote options, as long as these compacts keep coming up and we can practice in more states.
Yeah, that and that net was cracked a little bit during COVID where they relaxed some of the rules and things so you could do telehealth, especially mental telehealth. But that is a huge concern for parents and students. Like, I'm going to leave this therapist that I know and feel comfortable with and trust, and then I have to go find somebody new, or depend on the college. Now, the colleges are addressing this, but sometimes they're not able to bring in as much mental health as the students need.
Yeah.
But I'm going to have a panel of college deans. We're going to talk about this later on in the spring and early summer. So, what about from an international perspective, Lyndy? Because many people are working with students internationally, either international coming to the US or just international. I just did an interview this morning with someone from Macedonia, northern Macedonia. So, are you
I,
mentioned European? Are there, where would they look in those areas?
um, unfortunately, I don't know much about that because, like I have been looking into more understanding international, but international mental health is so complex because every country handles it differently, right? Like
Mhm.
there are some countries where you don't even have to have a license to practice mental health, and there's other countries that have very stringent rules. So I don't know enough about the international part. That's part of the interest of like learning and trying to collaborate more with this Swedish company.
Mhm.
So I can't really speak to that because I just don't know enough.
Okay. And that's understandable. It's kind of outside your scope of outside of your scope. But I do want to make the point that this is an
Oh,
international issue,
absolutely.
and that if you need to find somebody in your area, wherever you are, using some of these ideas and
Well,
tools.
yeah, the main two I use are not from the United States. So it's
Goodness.
definitely an international issue, and there's definitely resources. I started Googling stalking people on LinkedIn to find these. So,
Well, and that's a social media. That's a whole nother topic, talking about LinkedIn and using that to build connections and things. I'm glad you mentioned that. So as we're closing, what what can we do as college counselors or counselors just working with teens? What advice would you give us? Two pieces of advice. How can we support teens and their mental health?
Educate them and their parents.
That
Don't be
makes
afraid
that
to
big
bring
of a
it.
difference, huh?
Huge difference because it normalizes so many people that come into our office think they're the only ones that feel this way and feel so much shame for how they're thinking and feeling. And then they think I'm a failure, I can't do this. Everyone else seems to have it together because we're such a perfectionistic world, especially for the teens where there's so much comparison in the junior high and high school settings. And I've got a junior high kid right now, and I always joke that, oh, I thought I knew what I was getting into. And then I had a kid in junior high myself versus just working with kids in junior high. So educating, but you guys as college counselors that have seen so many of these high school kids go through these stressors, go through the up and downs of taking tests or preparing to go to college, being disappointed or change your mind, realizing you don't want to major in whatever, right? Like, oh my gosh, I spent my last 10 years working on this. I didn't get into it. Now I have to have a plan B, right? Like, the more you can educate and just anticipate. We do a lot of like, here are some things that might happen, or like with our, or hey, this might get worse before it gets better. Like, it's hard for clients and, students you're working with to hear that. But then when it happens, they're like, oh, that's right? Like, okay, they said this was going to happen. Okay, I can get through this. So education. Even if you have like here's the top 10 things that students are scared of when they go to college, or here's the top 10 ways things fall apart when they start college, like just anticipating those things for them makes it really, one, it builds trust and connection, and it helps them see, oh, you guys get it. You really do understand, and again, and then the advice as college counselors to parents I would give is try to help the parents build on love and connection with their student first. So many parents are focused on, right, grades, test scores, performance, accolades, all these things. They put so I have so many clients that are like, my parents want me to be perfect. My parents want X, Y, and Z. My parents expect X, Y, and Z. Well, I've been doing this for 10 years and I really don't want to do it anymore, but I'm scared to tell my parents, right? Like, so if we can help parents know, like, we want to hold students accountable, but students also biologically, their prefrontal cortex is not fully developed. So they can't see A to Z. A lot of them are still only looking at A plus B equals C, and some of them are only at A plus B.
Uh-huh.
So we have to help parents recognize, help them look at what are the short-term goals they have, what are some of their values and things that are important to them right now, and what decisions can they make this week that are going to help them with your long-term goals, but your kids aren't looking at long-term goals right now. So parents need to lead with love and connection and have realistic expectations. And if you guys as college counselors can help them set those realistic expectations, that is really, really helpful for the mental health of the teens.
Well, that's going to go on my quote board. Lead with love and connections. I love that, Lyndy. That is really, really good. Well, thank you so much. This has been so fascinating. I know I've learned a lot more about, it's one thing to hear about VR and how it can be used, and we're all imagining what that might look like, but to have you really show us, that's been so, so helpful. And it just opens up a whole new box of opportunities and ideas. So
Yeah,
thank
you're
you.
welcome. Thanks
And
for
did we
having
have a
me.
question? Carmen, I saw you put your camera on for a minute. Did we have a question you wanted to?
No,
No. Okay.
no.
All right. Well, join us in 2 weeks. Our next Friday Forum is kind of going to capitalize on this topic. We're going to talk about AI, and Kate Sonnenberg, who is on the call today, is going to join me, and she has become quite the person doing exactly what Lyndy's done, exploring, signing up for all sorts of different things, and she has become quite adept at using AI, and she can teach you into a million different things that you can do with it, but we're going to focus on college lists and helping students to put together questions and create the college, the university visit. So we're going to focus on that on January 24th. And the registration is in the link. I've got a 2025, I've got a huge lineup of all sorts of great guests and speakers. If you have somebody that you're interested in hearing, if you have a topic you're interested in hearing, please send that my way. You can always send it to Cindy at cindymcdonald.com. Remember, both Lyndy and my names have two Y's, and that's one way you can tell she was my daughter. And there is definitely a story behind your name, and it started in college. So, so anyway, thank you, Lyndy. Thank you, Carmen, and thank you, everybody. I have the very best audience. I'll see you again in